Welcome to Story Time with Chris James. If you'd like to get a t-shirt like the one I'm wearing, you can find these at tpublic.com. Show all your friends that you like listening to strange things. And with that, I will get on with the show where I left off. Sarah continued once they were in their room. Okay, it's really the guest room, but it was considered their room until otherwise designated as being something else. I don't want to leave. Who's going to keep the monsters away? Pam looked at her roommate. You have monsters lurking around your home? No, but if one were to show up, I don't think Sandy will be much use. You're just going to be 3 doors down. I can run that far in a few seconds. Pam knew she'd miss having her minion around as well. Promise you won't forget me. Sarah gave Pam her best sad look. We'll see each other all the time. You can come visit, but not on school nights. The room felt just a tiny bit colder that night. Chapter 10. The Book. Pam was sitting on Sharma's couch. So the guy that bought the book is hanging out at an old observatory? I'll just bet the book is there as well. Oh, I just want to read a few more pages. It's quite funny. Sharma looked at her guest. Of course, in an adult kind of way. Do you think it might have something to do with that black cloud? I don't see how. Like I said, it's an old joke book. Sharma really wanted to finish reading it. Well, being a ghost, I don't see why you can't just slip in and have a look. When do you want to go? Uh, I have a roast in the oven. The Civil War boys are having a get together, and I'm making dinner for them. Could we go later tonight? I suppose. Bring a raincoat and some rubber boots. Paula wasn't too keen on the idea of Pam going out after dinner, and not on a school night. You need to drive a ghost out to the old observatory so she can read a book. Having it from her mother, it did sound rather weird. I think it might have something to do with that black cloud hanging in the sky to our west. You mean that weather balloon? I think the Air Force is trying to use that explanation a few too many times. Paula thought about it. Home by 11. You finished your homework? Yes and yes. Well, okay then, but you be careful and don't drive too fast. It's dark out there. Paula hoped her one and only wouldn't become any more of a workaholic than she already was. Susie had moved several of the bookshelves closer to the far wall. This gave more space in the middle of the room. Pam was impressed. Those things are heavy. How did you get them moved? Pam was waiting for Sharma to come down. Oh, it was nothing. I got the Civil War boys to do the heavy parts. Susie was now sorting the books she had stacked along one wall. With any luck, I should be done before the end of the year. She held out a piece of paper. I need one of these. Pam looked at what appeared to be a cabinet with 4 dozen little drawers in it. What is it? It's a filing system from an old library. You should be able to find one at an antique shop. Susie hadn't stopped sorting. If you can't get the cards, I can make some of our own. I'll see if I can find one. Pam looked at Sharma as the ghost entered the library. Susie looked at the two and said, You two have fun, but don't stay out too late. Remember, it's a school night. Sharma gave her an odd look, but Pam was shocked. Let's get going. She turned for the back door. Sharma got into the hearse and asked, What was that all about? Pam put the car in gear. It sounded like Mrs. Hatchet slipped in there for a minute. She pulled out of the driveway. Once more, as the hearse came close to the same location as yesterday, the wind picked up. The cloud was just a black mass in a black sky. Lightning hit a tree just beside the car. Pam turned the wipers on. The rain picked up, and then it got serious. The rain was too thick to see past the hood. Wow, this is strange. I've never seen a localized storm like this. Pam slowed down to a crawl and she began looking for a place to park. You wouldn't think this much water could be held aloft in such a small cloud. She pulled over enough to be out of the road, but not in the ditch. Ready? She opened her door and jumped out. At least this time, Pam had on a raincoat and rubber boots. Sharma had borrowed a poncho and some rubber boots from Dan. Pam walked to the back door and grabbed her anti-lightning hat. Sharma looked at it as if Pam tried it on her head. Maybe you should have one too. Pam grabbed the one Hortense had been wearing and set it on Sharma's head. It stayed in place, so Pam tied the chin strap. There, now we're ready. They walked into the woods and made their way to the back gate. The rain let up once more. Pam looked at the old observatory. Lights could barely be seen from a few cracks in the wood. The light flickered like candlelight. Now what? Should I wait here while you have a chuckle? Pam hadn't thought about how long Sharma might be, and what do you do if somebody is in there? Why don't you come with me? I'll try to translate some of the less adult jokes. I don't see how they'd be using the book. Who's going to be able to read Sanskrit? As Sharma looked at the side door, she tried the knob, and yes, it was locked. Closing her eyes, she placed one hand on the wood just beside the knob and pushed. Her hand went through the wood. Reaching around by feel, she found the lock and turned it. The door swung inwards. Coming? She whispered as she stepped through and into the darker darkness beyond. Pam, not wanting to stand out here in the cold and wet, followed. The darkness wasn't complete. Light could be seen coming from around the corner. You think somebody's in there? She whispered to the ghost. Sharma simply stepped around the corner and had a look. The look on her face drew Pam to have a look as well. There were people, maybe a dozen, standing around a bonfire. It wasn't that they were scantily clad, they were totally undressed. None of them had the body to pull this off. Old and wrinkled, flabby was the word that came to mind. Things sagged down to places that they shouldn't belong. Pam nearly said something. She clamped both hands over her mouth to prevent any accidental utterances. That which has been seen. A man Pam didn't recognize had the book propped up on a lectern. He was waving his hands about and making weird sounds with his mouth. The look on everyone's face said evil, bad things were afoot. Sharma made a choking sound. Pam, thinking she was in extreme respiratory danger, reached out and made a grab for her. Pam's hand sunk halfway into the ghost companion before finding purchase. One of the naked people said, "What was that noise?" The entire group turned and looked right at Sharma. Pam found a handhold and pulled. The ghost came flowing into her, knocking Pam off her feet. She hit the floor with a gasp. Sharma came down on top of her. The sound of rain hammering on the dome did little to drown out their gasps. "Are you okay?" Pam whispered in a whisper. "Yes. Why did you grab me?" "I thought you were choking or something." "I was trying not to laugh." A very old, very large, very wrinkled woman stepped around the corner and looked around. Her eyes passed right over where Sharma was laying, still on top of Pam. The corpulent female went back to the group. "Why didn't she see me?" Pam whispered in a hard way. "I don't. Wait a minute." Sharma held up the poncho she was still wearing. "Dan said he had this with him when he broke his neck. It must have made you invisible." "Wow, good thing you brought it." The wrinkly naked man continued reading from the book. They managed to untangle themselves from each other. Then they helped each other back to their feet. They did their best to make no sound until Sharma began to laugh. "Shh! Stop it! What's so funny? Pam hoped Sharma's voice was just a ghostly whisper. Sharma was back on her knees. She had one hand over her mouth, making otherworldly sounds. The sound of the man reading made no sense to Pam, but it was having a devastating effect on on her friend. "I thought you said this place wasn't haunted." This came from one of the old folks in the firelight. "I was told nobody ever died here or anywhere nearby." This one sounded like Mr. Unimportant. "Listen, I hear something in that corridor." A female voice. "Can we get on with this ritual before I die of old age?" This came from a guy using two canes to hold himself up. All the time, the man with the book kept reading. Sharma was crawling on her hands and knees. She was trying to get to the back door. "I can't take it. It's just too funny." She made a laughing sound that shook the air around her. "See, I told you, there's some evil spirit out there that we didn't summon." The female voice again. "What do we do? Should we continue or make a run for it?" Mr. Double Canes asked. "We continue. We'll never get this chance again," said some other man. Sharma got a hold of the side door knob and pulled it open. She drug herself out the door and lay gasping in the rain. "Here, take this. You might need it." She pulled the poncho over her head and thrust it into Pam's hands. Laughing overtook her. Pam took the green poncho and stepped quickly back inside. Pulling the wet poncho over her body, she poked her head around the corner to see what was happening. Nobody seemed interested in her being interested in them. The man with the book continued reading words he didn't seem to understand. Pam watched as they all raised their arms in the air. The guy with the two canes chose that moment to fall over. None of his companions seemed to notice or care. The sound of rumbling came from above. The huge door in the dome, the one the telescope would have stuck out of had there still been a telescope here, began to open. As the door ground open, the black cloud became visible. It was made visible by the lightning bolts that were firing off just about every second or so. Oh, that and the bonfire. The cloud looked as if it was squeezing in through the opening. The air around the room began to move. Soon it was blowing as if a thunderstorm were in the room with them, which it was. The top of the dome was now filled with a black swirling mass. The lightning hit the ground around the gathered geriatrics. Pam reached one hand up to be sure her hat was still in place. The wind began to whip the poncho around, causing Pam to be pushed along as if she were a sailing ship. Her rubber boots just slid along the wet cement floor. She stopped sliding when she slammed into a pile of discarded office furniture. Several of the flabby crowd looked in Pam's direction, but failed to see her. The black cloud was beginning to spin faster. It looked like a mini tornado. Pam could now feel her body being pulled towards the storm. She grabbed the edge of a desk. The old folks in the middle of the room found nothing to grab. As the mini tornado spun faster, they soon found themselves being pulled up and away from the floor. Only the guy with the book had something to hang on to. The lectern was heavy and well built. The guy laying on the floor looked to be out of the storm. "Stop this thing, I'm getting sick," a large woman yelled as she went spinning by Pam's head. The lightning came crashing down. A black smudge was all that was left of a man who had been standing near the door. The bonfire went zipping up into the cloud, causing the inside of the cloud to glow as if it were on fire. Well, there was a fire in there. Pam felt her body being pulled by the storm cloud. She grabbed the edge of the desk, but the wind began to pull her up towards it. Soon her body was stretched out at an odd angle. Her boots were yanked from her feet. They vanished into the spinning cloud. Her hat was gone as well. The man at the lectern suddenly stopped reading. He looked up at the cloud as if seeing it for the first time. What on earth? He was hit by a bolt of lightning. He simply disappeared. Mr. Unimportant tried to make a run for it. He got halfway to the door before he swept off his feet. He went around and around the room. With each pass he was closer to the storm. Then, without a sound, he was gone. It took a few minutes before Pam found her feet were once more on the cold cement floor. Oh man, that's cold. She looked around for her boots. The old guy who'd been using the two canes and then he wasn't was still laying on the floor. Pam hoped he wasn't dead. If he was dead, she'd have to call the police and try to explain what was going on. If he was still alive, she could call an ambulance and then leave. Well, what would you do? She went to check on his condition. He had a weak coughing sound. Are you okay? Can you speak? Pam tried to feel for a pulse, but wasn't too sure how. What was it Eddie always said? If you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. She squatted next to him and looked for obvious problems. Sharma stuck her head around the corner. What happened? Where's everyone? She walked over to stand next to Pam. Pam told her what she knew. And him, who is he? Pam looked at the naked man laying next to her. Oh, icky. Oops. She pulled the poncho off and used it to cover his body. Great. Now he's invisible. Sharma found some coats over by the door and brought an armload. Here, cover him with these. I don't want him touching Dan's poncho. Pam pulled her cell phone out. She tried to make a call and then remembered the phone wasn't even on. She had to wait for it to come to life. Hey, sir, mister, who are you and what are you doing? He opened his eyes and stared at Pam. Are you the police? He reached up to adjust his glasses, which weren't there. Pam did the whole ID showing maneuver. Pam Bogus, paranormal investigator. Who are you and what were you trying to do with the book? It wasn't my fault. I just came along for something to do. We lived at the Archaic Advanced Age Assisted Living Complex. We just wanted to see if we could turn back time a little. Well, a lot. He looked around him, not able to focus on his surroundings. We hired Mr. Unimportant to locate the book because it held the secrets to longevity. No, it's a joke book, Sharma said. He didn't seem to hear her. No, it's a joke book, Pam repeated. What do you know? I got underwear older than you. He got a crotchety look on his face. Just answer the question, Sharma tried to sound authoritarian. Just tell us what you're doing, Pam translated. We heard about a book. It was full of life, they said, so we hired Mr. Unimportant to find it. Well, he offered to find it for a price, but it was all full of wormy writing. Look, buddy, it's called Sanskrit, an ancient and beautiful language. Sharma was getting upset. It's called Sanskrit. Anyway, how did that guy manage to read it? He used to be a language arts professor. He said he could read anything. I don't think he really knew what he was saying. And why not? He forgets things as soon as he says them. The old guy got a faraway look on his face. Well, that would explain why he didn't laugh. He forgot the joke before he got to the punchline. Sharma went over to the lectern and looked. The book was still there. It was a heavy volume. Pam called an ambulance and then considered getting out of there. You can't just drive away and leave him there. Haven't you ever heard of abandonment? Okay. Pam had a quick look around for her boots. The ambulance arrived and took the old guy away. The police showed up, but when they found out this was one of those cases, they got Pam to sign a quick statement saying she'd found the old guy, but there was no paranormal activity to worry about. The officer kept looking at Pam's anti-lightning device hat. "What about the other missing old folks?" Sharma asked. The officer, taking Pam's statement, looked around as if hearing something. "Is this place haunted?" he asked Pam. "No, not like you'd think." They walked back to the hearse. The gravel under Pam's feet hurt, but she was too tired to do anything about it. "If we hurry, I can drop you off and get home before pumpkin time." Pam pulled the aluminum foil hat off and set it in the back seat. Sharma had the book held firmly in her arms. Every few steps she had to adjust her grip. Her arms were getting tired. Pam did her best to not speed or break any traffic laws. She pulled into the storage shed and parked. She ran through the office, yelling a quick howdy to Susie as she went out the front door. Her pickup was right there, ready to go, so she did. The drive home took forever, but it was really only 15 minutes, as she walked in the door at 11:58. Chapter 11, October 31st. Being a senior, it was just short of being an adult, but that didn't stop anyone from dressing up for the occasion. The halls were filled with zombies and werewolves and mummies and something nobody was too sure what they were. Pam had planned on going as a pirate, but then when she tried to put her costume together, she'd looked more like a bag lady. Her next idea had been to go as an astronaut. After several attempts at building a costume, she had found the thing weighed so much she couldn't walk. In the garage, she found an old dress her mom had worn to a college Halloween party. Then she found a pointy hat, and well, now she was a witch. She found a pair of what looked like green face paint and lathered it on. The broom wound up being more of a hindrance than anything, as she was constantly having to find places to put it during class. Jackie Springheel came in dressed like a witch as well. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea you were coming in such a realistic looking outfit. I'll go change." Her outfit looked as if it had been tailor made for her by some celebrity designer. "No, no, don't do that. If we can find one more witch, we can say we're the Sanderson sisters." Pam tried to brush some of the dirt from her dress. The guys from the '50s were all dressed as zombie bikers, which didn't take too much creativity. They just smeared some green face paint on and a few nasty looking wounds. The bunch from the '70s had no idea what was going on, but they declared Pam and Jackie to be groovy. Pam drove straight home to pick up Sarah, who, not surprisingly, was dressed as a witch as well. "Okay, here's the plan. I mapped out the central neighborhood, and we have our work cut out for us." Pam pulled a map from her book bag. "I've enlisted a few of the guys from the office, so they should help as well." Everybody was meeting at the office at 6. Sarah was glad Pam was going trick or treating with her, but a bit off about having the whole gang there. How are they supposed to trick or treat if they're all a bunch of old guys? To Sarah, anyone over 25 was old. That I haven't figured out yet. Pam was hoping for inspiration to strike at any minute. She pulled into the parking dirt and went in to see about putting this off. Everyone was gathering around the coffee bar. Barbara, being somewhat small, had donned a costume and looked like a slightly large teenager. Pam noticed she had gone with a witch's outfit. Her hair looked as if she'd worked on it for hours to get that spiky, insane Bride of Frankenstein look. It was actually still an after effect of the lightning strike. Manuel was dressed up to try to look like her dad, but a very goth kind of dad, who was accompanying his daughter, who looked a little too old to be his kid. Eddie had brought one of his kids, Brissa, so they could walk around to knocking on doors and not look out of place. His daughter was dressed like a witch as well. Eddie had dressed all in black and he'd painted his face to look like a skull. Pam was feeling a whole lot outdone. Hildy looked like an adult, trying to look like a juvenile, dressed like a witch. Or maybe she looked like a juvenile, trying to look like an adult, dressed like a teenage witch. Whichever it was, her outfit barely fit. Surprisingly, Hildy was going along dressed up like her older sister, who really didn't want to go but was being forced by her mother, as she had donned a pointy hat just to try to get into the spirit of the night. Pam looked at the gathered investigators. We could use at least one more team. Central neighborhood is kind of scattered about, and it'll take us all night to hit every house. Susie was busy sorting and putting books away. She was trying to ignore all the witches gathered in the room. She had no idea what was going on, but it looked important in a weird kind of way. We need to find this Abershulik statue, and this might be our only chance. Mr. Batwing said it was dangerous and it needs to be found. Susie turned to Pam. Maybe I can help. Let me see if I can come up with something. She opened her purse and began rummaging inside. Out came some makeup, which she mixed together. As she smeared this on her face, her skin came out a nice shade of green. Combing her hair out, Susie took it into two pointy tails, which she fixed with hair bands. There, how do I look? Pam looked at what appeared to be a teenage witch. You need a hat. She looked closer and thought Susie looked too much like Bonnie now. It was a good thing she'd worn a black three-piece business suit. Her heels already looked very witchy. Barbara found a spare hat and placed it on Susie's head. Now she looked like a trick-or-treater. All you need is a parent. Each trick-or-treater had to have a backup in case they found the statue. I'll call my mother. She might not want to come over, but I think I can convince her it's for the good of the community. No, wait. I'll go with you. You don't have to bother your mom. Hortense thought she was going to regret this idea. She walked over to Wanda. Can I borrow this? She lifted the pointy hat from Wanda's head and set it on her own. She looked more like a witch than anybody else. I'm ready to be your mom. Pam looked at her assembled crew. Okay, let's get going. We have to knock on every door, even if they don't have any Halloween decorations. Pam hoped this was going to work. As each team walked off the front porch, Eddie handed out a walkie-talkie to the acting parent. He was the only one not acting. If you find the statue, be sure to call out the address. Everybody will converge on that location. Each team got going to their assigned section of town. The plan was they would start at the far parts of their section and would allow them to work towards the center. That way, as time went on, they would be closer together in case anybody found their target. Pam parked and got out. She pulled a black pillowcase from the back seat. Sarah had a huge plastic pumpkin for her accumulated candy. She pushed the doorbell at the first house and made ready her request. Trick or treat, she nearly yelled as the door swung open. What a cute little witch. And your older sister. The woman dropped a handful of candy into Sarah's pumpkin, and Pam got two pieces. Thank you, ma'am. They turned for the next door. The fourth door was answered by a man. He was dressed up to look like an axe murderer. Pam hoped he was dressed up. Um, is your wife here? She asked in her most pleasant voice. The axe murderer got a lost look on his face. Why do you want to see my wife? Sarah saved the day. You look like you just killed her, and we want to be sure we don't need to call the cops on you. Pam thought she was going to faint with embarrassment. The axe murderer began to laugh. Honey, come here, so these kids know you're still alive. A woman came to the door with two heads. It took Pam a second to figure out which one was real. All four eyes were blue. After a steady hour of trick or treating, Pam was beginning to get a stomach ache, as she suspected maybe that 25th candy bar was to blame, along with the first 24. The two-way radio made a noise. Pam, this is Hortense. Can you hear me? Over. Go ahead, over. Pam had to hold the radio right up to her ear to make out the words. I think we have a problem. Susie's getting into an argument. Over. With the people at the house? Over. No, herself. She's getting mad about somebody eating all the candy. Over. Hortense was having to whisper so Susie or anyone else wouldn't hear her. Uh, try to talk to Dorothy. She's the only sane one in there. Over. I'll try. Hopefully this'll work. Out here. As Sarah came walking over with her pumpkin overflowing. Susie getting her crazy on? Yes, I hope we find this statue soon. My stomach can't take any more candy. Oh, look, I got a Snickers. Hortense was standing at the curb watching as Susie explained to some woman that she really was just 16. As she came walking away from the door, she gave Hortense a weird look. So, what are you supposed to be, a giant or a witch or a giant witch? Which is it, witch? At first, Hortense thought Susie was messing around, but then she remembered what Pam had said. Are you Bonnie Fulbright? Yeah, have we met? Bonnie turned and threw a handful of candy wrappers on the ground. Pam, Bonnie just showed up. Over. Oh no. She's doing anything nasty? Over. Littering and confronting people at the doors. Over. Just keep an eye on her and call if anything gets too weird. Pam considered running over to where Hortense and now Bonnie were located. Then she looked at Sarah and had to decide. Let's try to hurry. Things are getting interesting and we need to help Hortense out. Not everyone was happy to see two witches at their door. When nobody answered, Sarah would keep ringing the bell until somebody came to the door or it became obvious the house was empty. I'm not into Halloween, no candy. That's cool. We just wanted to tell you we're not going to TP your house tonight. Sarah gave her extra cute. Well, good then. Good night. Sarah just stood there waiting at the door. Pam was standing on the sidewalk waiting. You coming? Sarah looked over her shoulder. This woman was wearing dark glasses and I couldn't see her eyes. Her eyes are normal. Let's go. How do you know? You were looking the other way when she opened the door. This is Mrs. Grampus. She's my homeroom teacher. That's why I turned when she opened the door. Oh, Sarah started walking beside Pam. Is she always so gruff? Yes. Pam looked back to be sure Mrs. Grampus wasn't looking out the window. I don't think I'll much like high school. Sarah checked her pumpkin to be sure she hadn't eaten everything yet. Hildy watched as Hilda went skipping up to the door and rang the bell. Trick or treat, she fairly percolated with youth. As Hilda came walking back with the goodies, Hildy just stood there. Do you have to do that? Do what? Hilda had a giant grin on her face that looked like it hurt. Skip like you're 12 again. Hildy wondered if her sister would ever grow up. I'm having fun. I wish I could do this every year. So what'd you get? Hildy looked into the sack. Hershey's, a Clark bar, two Baby Ruths, and a Kit Kat. Can I have the Kit Kat? Bonnie was acting a bit nasty, but she wasn't getting any worse. Why are you following me? What do you think? We're related just because we're both dressed like witches? Hortense had tried to fall back and not crowd Bonnie, but then she wasn't so sure Bonnie would say anything if she came in contact with the heterochromatic woman. Hortense had tried. Heterochromatic is when you have two different colored eyes. I'm just going the same direction as you. Aren't you a little old for trick or treat? Bonnie went to the next door and rang the bell. Sarah had just scored a huge handful of M&M baggies. As she turned back towards Pam, a kid came walking up with a bag over his head. Pam noticed there were no eye holes. He rang the bell and said the required trick or treat, but it came out as trick or treat since the bag had no mouth hole either. He was handed a handful of Butterfingers. Pam watched as he walked back to a woman dressed like a soldier. It took a second to recognize Jolene Clark. Pam was amazed. How did he do that? Hey, Pam, I don't know, but that giant woman has been working with him. Now he runs around the house with a blindfold on and he never bumps into anything. Well, except the dog. Wow. Look, you overgrown pod person, stop following me. Bonnie was beginning to suspect this giant was working for those horrible folks at that hospital, the hospital with the bars over the windows. She really didn't much like that place, even though it was kind of her second home. I told you, it's a mere coincidence that we're both heading in the same direction. Hortense had tried everything to not look like she was following Bonnie, but being so tall made being inconspicuous a bit difficult. Bonnie suspected she might have to get violent if this alien didn't stop harassing her. I don't know what's weirder, you or that woman with the one green eye. I? Green? Just one? Hortense tried to think which house it must have been. She hadn't been too far behind Bonnie, but it had been hard to see who was at each door. How could she get this psychotic girl to give her the address? Sometimes you get inspiration from people around you. Sometimes you get it from deep within yourself. Sometimes it just smacks you in the head from unknown whereabouts. Hortense had an aha moment. Dorothy, which house had the woman with the one green eye? Bonnie gave the giant a clever look. You're not tricking me into letting that nosy woman steal my mind. Bonnie turned as if to approach the next house. She turned around and kept turning until facing Hortense again. Third house back, that-a-way. The voice sounded so different. But then, stop following me or I'll unleash the Kraken. Hortense backed away from Bonnie, not wanting to see who or what the Kraken was. Okay, you don't have to tell me 14 times. I'm gone. She got her two-way radio out. Pam was digging in her pillowcase, looking for anything which had bicarbonate of soda in it, when Pam, Hildy, Manuel, everyone, I think I have the address. Her voice was choppy because she was running as she spoke. Malfeasance Street, where's that? She looked at Sarah, hoping she knew. 2 blocks that way and one over. Sarah pointed to their east. Pam keyed the radio. We're on the way. Are you sure? No, but I'm running out of places to look, so this has got to be it. Hortense sounded excited. Let's go then. Pam took off running, Sarah right behind her. As the bag staff had all worked their assigned areas, they had slowly begun getting closer together. As Pam and Sarah ran, they saw Barbara and Manuel running on the other side of the street, followed by Hildy and Hilda. Eddie and his came from the side street and joined the parade. It looked like a witches' race. Hortense stood on the sidewalk out front of a house that she hoped was the right one. She had just sounded the alarm and was having second thoughts. What if that psychopath was just lying to me? She looked to her right and then her left. Hortense was hoping some kid would come along and ring the bell so she could stand there looking like a parent and get a look at the woman on the other side of the door. No such kid came along. Shoot! Hortense walked up to the house and rang the bell. The door swung open. Trick or treat! Hortense held out her purse. The woman at the door looked into the purse. Then she looked up at Hortense. Aren't you a little old for trick or treating? Too many growth hormones when I was younger. Hortense looked down at the woman. One green and one blue eye looked back. The parade of witches came running down the street. One or two people walking by stopped to watch. They rounded the corner and ran to where Hortense was standing, munching on a handful of candy bars. Pam stopped and looked at the house. Is this the place? Hortense swallowed a mouthful of chocolate. Yes, and she has really good candy. They gathered around the mailbox and looked at each other. Now what? Hildy asked, of no one in particular, but Pam felt as if she was the focus of the questions. We need to get a look inside. Maybe the statue's not there. Sorry. Barbara pulled a candy bar from her pocket. Hilda volunteered to give it a try. She rang the bell while Hildy stood by acting like an older sister waiting for her sibling. The bag staff all ducked down behind a car parked at the curb. As Hilda did her best to look young and not like someone trying to get a look inside the house, Hildy tried to look into the house for the statue. They walked back to the street with no idea as to whether the statue was there or not. Barbara went next. She rang the bell and held out her bag. Manuel stood next to her, acting apparently inquisitive. As the two investigators walked back to the curb, Manuel just shrugged his shoulders. Eddie and Brisa went next. She came away with half a bag full of sweets, and Eddie came away wondering how he was supposed to see anything when this woman's eyes nearly hypnotized him. Pam led Sarah up to the door and let her ring the bell. Trick or treat. The woman looked at Sarah and then at Pam. What's with all you kids dressed like witches tonight? She handed over a handful of candy to each of them. Pam tried to look around the room behind the woman as quickly as she could without being too obvious. The woman gave Pam a look. What, you want my couch too? Is that it? The woman stared right at Pam. Pam felt as if the woman was looking into her soul. Nice house. She kicked one shoe against the other. The door slowly swung shut. We need someone to try looking in the back window while she's at the front door, Barbara said around a mouthful of candy. Who hasn't gone yet? Pam looked around at her cohorts. It's in the living room. There's a cloth draped over it. Susie had joined the gang when nobody was looking. You're back, Hortense said without thinking. Yes? I turned around and you were gone. Susie gave her an accusatory look. Pam jumped in. When were you able to look in the window? While you guys were all getting candy and looking in the front door. You didn't see me? I waved. Susie looked more like her old self. I looked in the kitchen window and then the living room, and there it is. Man, it's huge. Barbara looked around the group. Okay, we know it's here. Now what? As they stood around hiding behind the car, a patrol unit rolled to a stop right next to them. What are you kids doing? You're not thinking of TPing this nice lady's home, are you? He shone a flashlight on each of them. When the light hit Hortense, it froze. Wow, that's a big kid. Sarah could think of no reason not to, so she did. There's a stolen statue inside, and it's possessed by a demon, and we need to return it to its caretaker. She was the only one not having to squat down behind the car. The officer looked at Sarah. Then his eyes rolled over to Pam. The look of recognition crossed his face. Are you Pam Bogus of the Bogus Anomalous Group? Yes, sir. Pam hoped this wasn't how her future was going to be. Does this have anything to do with paranormal things? Yes, sir. Have a nice night. Could you wait till midnight to start anything? I'm off then. He pulled away from them as quickly as he could without squealing his tires too much. He knows you? Sarah asked. I'm afraid they all do now. Pam felt just the tiniest bit tormented. Pam stood up. She had an idea. It might not be the best idea, or even a good idea, or a sane thing to do, but it beat sitting on the pavement dressed like a witch. She walked up the sidewalk. As she went, the others fell in behind. By the time she reached the door, the whole Bag gang was behind her. She pushed the doorbell. When the door opened, the woman looked out at them, then just stood there. "Well?" "Well, what?" Pam was caught off guard by the question. "You have to say trick or treat, or you get no candy." The woman looked at them. "Oh, it's you again." Pam reached down inside to find the courage and pulled out her ID. "Look, ma'am, we know you have the Abshglas statue. Hand it over, or else." "Or else what? You going to cast a spell on me?" She laughed at her own joke. As she began to close the door, Pam put her foot in the jamb and stopped it. They were both surprised by the foot move. Pam pushed the door open and walked in. She felt as confident as a doughnut at a police convention. "Look, Mrs. or is it Miss? Would you tell me your name so I know how to address you? My name is Cassandra Pandora, and it's Ms." She was backing up as the Bag Witches surrounded her. Eddie had told his daughter to wait out by the curb. As they entered the living room, Pam spotted the statue. It was carefully disguised by draping a sheet over the top. The sheet was a king size, but it only covered the top half. Mrs. Pandora quickly stepped around the statue and yanked the cover off. "Stay back, or I will summon Abercrombie." "Abercrombie? What kind of a name is that for a demon?" Barbara asked. "Hey, I didn't pick the name. I just asked for a demon. You have to take what you get." The statue was immense. It stood 10 feet tall, with wings that reached upwards and outwards. It was a good thing Mrs. Pandora had vaulted ceilings in her living room. The face looked like a cross between a goat and a man. Giant fangs protruded from the top and bottom of its mouth. The chest and arms were nothing but muscle. The legs were those of a goat. On the floor around the statue was a huge pentagram drawn in what looked like blood. All the Bag members took an involuntary step back. Pam stared at the statue. Mrs. Pandora stared at Pam. The Bag folks began to mill about, unsure what to do next. Susie asked, "Are you sure you have a demon in there? I mean, you claim to have a demon trapped inside your big ugly statue, but all I see is a lump of clay." "Of course there's a demon in there, and I'm not afraid to unleash him." "Well, we're waiting." Susie crossed her arms and gave her best annoyed look. Pam whispered, "Susie, knock it off. We don't need to see the demon right now." "I think she's bluffing." Susie looked up just as the wings of the statue began to move. "Oh!" Everyone made a move towards the front door. Everyone except Mrs. Pandora, as she just stood by the statue yelling something in Latin and pointing her finger at the witches. Pam pushed Sarah towards the door to the front room, following right behind her. Hortense pulled her umbrella out and held it like a sword, as she was backing up as fast as the statue was moving towards them. Barbara grabbed the door handle and pulled. "It won't open." "What? You're kidding me." "Try kicking it." "It won't move." Pam bumped into Susie. "Did you have to challenge her?" "Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time." The statue reached the door to the entry. It stood higher than the top of the door, so it just smashed the wall open. Sheet rock and wood rained down on the witches as they tried to beat the door open with their fists. "Into the dining room!" Pam yelled, pushing the others before her. With bits and pieces of the house crashing down on them, the Bag members all got to the other side of the huge glass table. It looked very contemporary until a piece of building crashed down on it. There were sparks flying from wires pulled loose as the statue broke down bits of the wall and the ceiling. Smoke began to fill the air. The smoke detectors began to scream, along with some of the witches. Hortense used her umbrella in the only way it had been made to be used. She smashed the window out. Out the window, quick! As Sarah looked out through the hole. The house has burglar bars. Oh, this is terrible. What do we do now? I didn't agree to this. Anybody seen my candy? This reminds me of a claymation movie. Run that way. Pam began pushing people towards the door to the kitchen. As they ran, she looked back and saw the statue coming through the door that had been too small for it. Everybody ran through the kitchen, around the only corner leading back into the living room. All the windows had bars covering them. Now what? The sound of pots and pans hitting the floor filled the air. The lights went out. Oh, this is just not right. Red and blue flashing lights began to fill in where the white lights had been. Back to the front door. The fire department is here. Pam led everybody back to the front door. As they came tripping and scampering over the debris that had once been the front room, Pam saw the front door come flying open. A man with an axe stood in the opening. Behind him, she saw men pulling hoses off of the fire truck. As the Bag Witches all scrambled to get out the door, the statue came crashing behind them. The firefighter in the doorway stepped aside as what looked like a coven came running by. When he saw the statue, he turned and ran along behind the escaping investigators. Pam saw Sarah trip over something left out in the yard. She reached down and got the tween up just as the statue caught up to them. The ground shook as it bore down on the two. One of the firefighters was about to enter the house to battle the fire when he saw a new adversary looming up in front of him. He nearly sucked his face mask into his face. They don't let firefighters carry guns because they would use them a lot. Firefighters tend to be type A personalities and they seldom run from a fight. As the statue rose to its full height, he aimed the only weapon he had, his nozzle, and opened the valve. Water came pounding out at 95 gallons a minute. The nozzle was quickly switched to a straight stream and it hit the statue full on. As the water hit the clay, it caused an unexpected result. The clay began to dissolve. First, clay covering the wings came off, leaving behind a steel frame that had supported it. Next, the right arm turned to a puddle on the ground. Pam and Sarah were both knocked to the ground. With all the dexterity of a well-trained hose jockey, he blasted the statue. The eerie thing was, the statue didn't make a sound. It became a huge brown puddle of watery clay. I guess Mr. Abskalach never bothered to fire his artwork. Pam got back to her feet. Pam was soaked. Sarah was soaked. They helped each other back to the standing position. The metal frame that had held the clay together was all that still stood. Is that thing going to kill us? Hildy looked at the metal frame in the shape of a statue. I don't think so. There's nothing left to hold the demon in place. Pam hoped she was right. Ms. Pandora came stumbling out through the hole in her house that had been the front door. What did you do to Abercrombie? She fell to her knees in the muddy brown goo. You ruined him. She picked up a handful of watery clay and tried to stick it back in place. I was going to rule the world. She watched as the clay fell to the ground. With this moving mountain of clay now a floundering puddle of mud, the firefighters got busy with their normal jobs. They took the fighting into the house. Ms. Pandora looked over her shoulder at her house. You think my homeowner's policy will cover this? Chapter 12. After All. Pam and Sarah were dropped off at her pickup by the firefighters. Sarah wanted to ride on the back step, but they said no, so the two had to climb into the crew cab and enjoy the time off their feet. Somehow Sarah had hung on to her pumpkin. Think our moms will be upset we're all wet? Yes, but we can always say we got caught in a sprinkler system. Wouldn't that be lying? True. Pam fired up her truck and headed for the house. I'll think of something. Yes, both mothers were upset. When the two adventurers came walking in, leaving a trail of muddy water behind them, questions were asked. Pam wound up telling the whole story. Threats were made of being grounded. Privileges were on the line. The two mothers pulled their heads together to come up with appropriate punishments. Pam and Sarah went upstairs to dry off and change. Pam discovered the green face paint had been dye instead. It wouldn't come off. She wailed from the bathroom. Once they were less witchy looking, the two slunk downstairs to find out what was to be their fate. Al was sitting at the table. He had interceded on behalf of his daughter, and Sarah was going to benefit as well. Paula began. Seeing as you two did save the city and possibly the entire world, I can't see myself punishing you. So just be warned, no more demons or living statues. From now on, leave that stuff to the professionals. Nothing but a wire frame. But that was my reason for being, my purpose in life. I swore an oath to guard it until I died. What am I going to do? Now, Pam was talking to Mr. Batwing on the phone. Do you have any psychic abilities? Pam could always use another psychic. Then she had a question. How did Mrs. Pandora manage to steal that statue? It must weigh a ton. Oh, it was probably my fault. I was moving to a new apartment and had the statue mounted on a dolly, as she was the realtor who assigned my new place. He sounded a bit embarrassed. She'd asked me why I needed a vaulted ceiling and a huge patio door, and I kind of told her. Didn't that violate some kind of oath? I swore to guard the thing. Nothing about not talking about it. I was trying to impress her. Mr. Batwing sounded very contrite. Pam looked at her light green hands and wondered how long it would take to get rid of the dye. If you enjoyed the show, if you did, tell your friends to listen up as well. If you didn't enjoy the show, then why are you still listening? Until next time, this is Chris James for Story Time. And if you want to, you can just hum the exiting music.